Hello and welcome to another .py Python video tutorial. In this video tutorial I'll be explaining layout managers for PyQt apps. Basically, layout managers make it a lot easier for us to set the layout of the widgets in our app, so giving us more control over where those widgets are in our app window, as well as how those widgets will reshape and resize when we change the size and shape of our app window. So I've got a very basic PyQt app just here, and it's got 3 widgets. Each of them are buttons, button 1, 2, and 3. You can see in this example, as I change the shape and the size of my app window, the widgets behave in a certain way. So for one, they're staying horizontally in the center of the app, and 2, buttons take up the whole width of the app and they stay the same width as each other, no matter how wide I make the app. So something like this is really easy to do with a layout manager, and that's going to be one of the first things I'll be showing you, is how to create this example. Then we'll go through how to vary some of those things, like how the widgets stretch and where they are in the app, and then we'll go on to some different layout managers and how you can play around with those as well. So there are 4 basic layout managers for PyQt apps. Those are the horizontal box layout, the vertical box layout, the grid layout, and the form layout. And I'll jump to the code now. If you want to use any of those layouts, the first thing you'll have to do is import the packages for them. So in my code here, the first few lines are for importing packages standard to PyQt apps. The next line down, this one here, imports all of the layout managers I just listed. So we're going to be going through all of them in this code. I'll paste the code below so you can just copy the ones that you want to use for your code. And the next set of packages, these are a few extra tools that go with QForm layout. So I'll explain these when I get to the QForm layout. Next, after importing the packages, I've started my code, and this is the class that sets up our PyQt app. If you're not familiar with the coding that goes into making PyQt apps, I'd recommend following the link in the description below and just watching a bit of the video that gives a basic overview of how to write PyQt apps. Just gives you a really basic structure that you can work with. If you are familiar with all of this, then we'll move on to the layout part of the PyQt app. So the layout part comes before adding any widgets. The first layout that we'll be going through is the horizontal box layout, and is actually the layout that I showed in that first example. A horizontal box layout basically puts widgets into your app left to right as you add new ones, and they'll be aligned by default in the center of the app and take up the entire width of the app. So we create an app with a horizontal box layout by first setting a layout equal to QHBoxLayout, the class that we imported above. Once we have this layout object, we can start adding widgets to it with the function addWidget. So you can see I've added 3 push buttons to our layout, and without me having to do anything else, it's just distributed them along the middle of our app like this. We can have a bit more control about how the widgets behave in our app window, because addWidget actually has a few more variables if we want to stray from just the default setup. So the first thing we can specify is a horizontal stretch of our widgets. At the moment, you notice, as I said before, they all stretch the same amount when I stretch the window horizontally. If we put a number in here after specifying our widget type, which was a button in this case, that will control the amount of horizontal stretch that the widget will see when we stretch the app. So by default it's 0. By not writing any numbers, it would be the same as writing our code like this. But perhaps let's add higher stretch values for the buttons further to the right. So let's see what happens if we close this, run that again, and now stretch our app window. You can see, as you might have expected, button 3 that has the highest stretch stretches the most when we stretch our window. So that's one type of thing we can play with the horizontal box layout. The next thing is the alignment of the apps. So you notice the line along the middle, like we said, and take up the entire width. There is another thing we can add after the stretch number, and that is the alignment that we want to use. And the alignment is actually a class name. So you actually have to know the name of the class that you want to use that fits to the alignment that you want to use, which can be tricky because you have to already know the name before you use it. But I've put a link in the code here which you can follow from the description below. Basically takes you to the Qt documentation, and it has a list of all the classes for all the different alignments for your widgets. It has the class name here and a little description for each class, although it's kind of intuitive just from the name how your widget will be positioned. So let's test out the align top alignment class. Go back to our code. Another important thing to know actually is all of those alignment classes are in the Qt package. So let me just jump back up to the top, to the packages. You can see from PyQt5.qcore I've imported Qt, and Qt has each of those packages that you just saw inside. So as an example, if I want to align, let's say actually I want to align, button 3 along the top rather than the center, I would write from the Qt package, use align top. Just going to close my app, run the code again, and now when we change the shape of the window, button 3 stays along the top, but it still has that higher stretch factor, which is what we wanted. That's good. So that's all there is to the horizontal box layout. I'm just going to comment this in my code and move on to the vertical box layout, which is very similar to the horizontal box layout, but this time instead of adding widgets from the left to the right, we add them from the top to the bottom. Let's run that and you can see. Now we've got 3 buttons. They're behaving slightly differently now. They still take up the entire width of the app, but now they've been distributed evenly top to bottom in the app. We can still add some other variables in the add widget function, although the horizontal stretch factor isn't going to do anything, I don't believe. I know we can do alignments. Let's just try and see if we put a number less than 1 in the stretch factor, because it's already going to take up the entire width of the app. Let's use, for a bit of difference, let's go align, you can't see that. Let's go align bottom rather than align top. Oh, Qt there. Run that code. Okay, so the horizontal stretch factor didn't do anything. I didn't actually expect it to. Oops. But the Qt align bottom has worked, so now button 3 stays along the bottom of the app. So that is the vertical box layout. Let's comment that out and move on to the next layout type. And actually I've got 2 examples for this layout. This is the grid layout. First up is our example, which I've called grid layout 1. I'm going to run the code so I can talk to the app as I go through my code. This, as the name suggests, sets out our widgets in a grid. And after we've specified what type of widget we want to add to our layout, we have 2 numbers here which give that widget a grid position by row and column. So you can see 0, 0 puts the widget in row 0, column 0. Then button 2 ends up in still row 0 but column 1, so it moves 1 across. And you can follow that logic through all those 5 buttons, and you can get this app here. So that is a nice basic grid layout. Let's move on to my next grid layout example. if we want the widgets to take up more than one grid space, we can also do that. Here we have a 3-button grid layout. You can see button 1 is now stretched across 2 columns. We can do that by, as before, we specify 2 numbers which give the position of the widget, but then we can specify the number of columns for the widget to occupy, and then the number of rows for the widget to occupy. So button 1 still starts at the 0, 0 position, but occupies 1 row and 2 columns. And then we can generate this, and we can make that as many rows or columns as we like. We can have different shapes of buttons for more complex app layouts. And I believe actually we can add alignments to this as well. Let's see for our long button. Oops, I got that wrong. Align top is what we want to test out. Let's close that. And we do have the ability to add alignments to buttons as well, which is quite cool. So there we have the grid layout. Let's comment that out and move on to our last layout type, which is the form layout. I'm going to run that so I can talk to it as I go. This is a bit different. In this case, we have an app that has kind of 2 columns here. It's got a kind of description column and then some kind of entry widget. So in the first one we have some text entry, which is called the name, kind of a field name here. Age then has an adjustable number with up and down buttons. Options has a drop-down menu with 3 options. So this code has a few more lines than the previous ones, but perhaps I'll jump to the end first. So we're staying with the more familiar part of the code, which is similar to the other examples we've seen. Instead of having add widget, we use now add row for the form layout. And each time we add a row, we give a string for this first left-hand part of our row, and for the right-hand part, that's our interactive part of the form layout, and we grab that from a widget that we've already set up. So name form comes from up here. Name form is created as a QLine edit. QLine edit is one of the classes we actually imported up here. It goes with QForm layout. So QLine edit creates a widget like this, which lets us put text in a box. We can add some text to start with by using set text on our line edit object that we just created. Next down, age form is a spin box. Spin box comes from the other package that we imported up the top. We can also use set value to set a value in here. And lastly, we have the combo box. We've set combo equal to combo box and added 3 items in there, which go into our drop down. So once we've created each of these different widgets, we add them to our layout using add row. So I hope that's given you a good few examples of using layout managers with PyQt apps. Any questions, please post them in the comments below, and thank you for watching.